Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the COSMA webinar for December. My name is Ruth Ann Rugg. I am the transitional leader for COSMA, and it is my great pleasure today to introduce you to someone that you know. You may not know you know, but you know her well. This is Clara Allen. She is on the event planning staff for AAM. Let's see, her official title is Meetings and Events Manager. And what she does is all of the big meetings for AAM. So if you have been to anything, whether it was the huge annual meeting or Museums Advocacy Day or all of those in between, then you have been the beneficiary of Clara's work. When we were first talking about this topic, we realized that all state museum associations, with very few exceptions, do some kind of conference throughout the year. Now, it may be gigantic and have, several hundred people there, or it may be a small gathering, but there's a lot of work that goes into it regardless. And a lot of the steps that you have to go through for planning are the same regardless of the size. So we asked Clara if she would be kind enough to spend an hour with us today, an hour and 15 minutes if you want to count the adjusting all the technology, although I promised her I've gotten a little bit better at it, to help us understand what she does and how we could take some of those tips to improve what we do as well. Over on your panel, you will see a little question mark. Let me pull it up, make sure I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, where you are all muted right now, which means we cannot hear you. You see the question mark over here that says, if you have a question, just hit that and then type it in, and I will be glad to translate that for Clara. Or you can raise your hand if you are at a place where you have a good speaker and you would like to ask your own question. We can try it that way. We're not always successful, but we got to keep trying so we learn how to do this. We are at a very busy time of year, and although most of the conferences for the State Museums Association are over, they start up again in January. I've been looking at the calendar and looking at everyone's schedule, and it is really year-round. And I hope you are all going to join us in Washington in February. Museums Advocacy Day is on February 24th and 25th. If you have never done this, man, you got to come. You will learn so much about advocacy, about stating the case for your museum, and frankly, all the museums in your state. To make it even more appealing for you, we're having a COSMA meeting on Sunday afternoon, which is February 23rd, 2:30 to 4:30. And this would not be happening without the assistance of Clara. Clara was able to locate in AAM's conference hotel a space for us to use. And because AAM is an incredibly supportive partner, they are happy for us to do that, and I'm really grateful. So we have a lot to talk about today, so I am going to turn me off and let Clara take over. I'm not sure I gave her a really proper introduction. You all know her through AAM, but she was also an events associate at a think tank in Washington, D.C., and supported the production of more than 200 events each year. Now, most of us are prepared for a nervous breakdown to do only a few events, one big one and a few smaller ones throughout the year. So try to imagine the nerves of steel this young woman has to have done 200 in a year, and then to move on to AAM, which, as you know, is just a huge production. So with no further ado, you all know how to ask questions. I'm going to turn me off and turn it over to Clara. Thanks, Clara.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be talking with all of you today. Like she said, I am the event manager here, meetings and event manager here, which means I do a bunch of things, a lot of which has to do with our annual meeting, in addition to the rest of our team. And then primarily Museums Advocacy Day, as well as the other small events that come up over the course of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you. Make sure. All right. Let's see. All right. So this is our agenda today. I'm going to hit each one of these sections, which is essentially a good kind of timeline-esque in terms of how we think through each different part of the event, starting with the basic or starting with the very broad and getting into the very detailed minutia on site. So we will be monitoring the questions in the chat. Please feel free to throw out any questions if you have them. I'll also stop after every section and see if we have any questions pertaining to that particular section. Also, I know that you guys there's a very broad range of events represented here. So I'm kind of cutting it down the middle. And these details are coming from the assumption of a mid-level event. So we're talking maybe a couple, maybe 100 people, maybe 1 or 2 days. But in essence, all of these concepts and details can really be applied to any event. It's just the way that you apply it. So if you have any questions specific to a certain size event or your event, I'd be happy to answer those. This is a general idea of how we at AAM think through the events that we do. So starting right off. First thing, obviously, you have to think about right when you start even considering having an event is the very basic details. AAM, when we do these smaller type events, we tend to like to partner with different organizations, and that usually means that that organization will be the venue. So there's typically a museum for us. It depends on the event you're hosting, on the topic you're trying to present, all of those sorts of details. Obviously, partnering with another organization has its pros and cons, because you're bringing in just that other voice into the field. There's a lot more collaboration, coordination, some logistical technicalities that can arrive with bringing another organization in, but it also has some huge pros because you can lean on them and source them for information and potentially venues. So obviously you need to think about your date and time. If you're partnering with someone, that will oftentimes dictate your date and time based on when they're available or their venue is available. The other thing you really want to be sure to do, which may seem obvious but is often overlooked, is making sure you're not overlapping with any big holidays, religious holidays, federal holidays, whatever it might be. They're all over the place, and so be sure to take a look at that before you nail down your date, as well as, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but defining your audience is super critical to the success of your event. And so when you're thinking about your date, it's a really good idea to do some market research to figure out what other conferences might be going on around the time that you're doing yours that your audience might otherwise be attending, so you're not competing with anyone else, or what has been done in the past. Is this just redundant? Is there another way you can kind of twist your content to make it a little bit more niche, a little bit more different or unique than the other things that might have happened? So that is a really critical part of choosing your date and time as well. City and venue, obviously, if you have a partner, very dependent on where they're located. Another great way to consider your city or venue, again, thinking about your audience, where are those people primarily located? And if you're presenting on a specific topic, maybe think about, is there a university that has a full program on that topic, or is there a museum or an organization that has is doing a lot of work on that particular topic, and maybe targeting that area so that you can get the most number of people in the room and also the most relevant types of people that you want to come by. In terms of venue, if you're partnering with someone, obviously, and they have the venue, then that dictates your place. But otherwise, if you are not partnering, obviously budgetary restrictions are probably the #1 thing you'll be thinking of in terms of venue, but also, again, who your audience is, the kind of environment you want to create, what you want your audience to be doing. All of that can be affected by your venue. So it's really important to think through that. And you can get really creative. If it's, very academic, do you want to be in a university space? Do you want to be in a museum space? If it's a little bit more low key, do you want to be maybe botanical garden or something a little bit more creative to get those creative juices flowing? So you can get very creative with that, and it can create a really cool event. Just making sure we don't have any questions before I move on. All right.
I don't see any yet, but I'm watching.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next thing that's super important are your goals. You have to define your metrics, because this is what's going to tell you whether or not this event is going to be a success. And the more detailed you can get, the more numerical you can get, the better, because you'll be able to track against those metrics and really, whether it's just for yourself or presenting to your organization as a whole, to your board, to your attendees, really show them what this event was able to accomplish. And then we'll get more into this later, but when you send out your post-event survey, if the more detailed metrics you have, the better your survey will be placed to actually present you with data as to whether or not you met those metrics. So we talked about this a little bit before, but who do you want your audience to be, and how many people do you want to be there? And why, I think, is a really important question. Some people forget to answer that one. How many people do you want in the room for it to be a success? Do you want, is this really solution focused problem solving? You want maybe 15 people in a room, all working really closely together, a lot of collaboration to come to some sort of solution? Do you want just to get your message out as widely as possible? You want 300 people in a room, and you want it to be very education based. All of this is very important to think through as you start crafting this event. As well as then your actual learning objectives, which is what you'll be presenting to your attendees. And here at AEM, we use the rule that you finish the sentence, upon completion of this event, attendees will. We typically like to have 3 of them. And so this just tells us what we're getting at. What do we want attendees to walk out of the door with? What knowledge, what new information, skills, techniques, advice, whatever it might be. And this is, again, a good way to then tie that into the survey. You can actually just ask, we don't tend to post our learning objectives straight out, but in the survey, you can then ask, did you learn XYZ thing? And track back, see if you hit those learning objectives. Also, your outputs and outcomes. Do you want blog posts, white papers, actual solutions they can bring back to their organizations after the event? What maybe more concrete things do you want your attendees to walk out with? So all of those together, the learning objectives and the outputs and outcomes, will help you craft your concept statement or your description, which is then your marketing tool. So that's what you can put online, communicate to your attendees, put on the website. It's, your elevator pitch for why people should come to this, what they're going to get, how they're going to benefit, and what's super cool and important about your event. And that all comes from those goals that you previously set. Not to overlook the probably most important, your revenue sponsorship goal. Setting your budget is a very key part of this to make sure you have success. At AAM, our sponsorship is run through our development team. Not all organizations have a team dedicated to that. If you are looking for sponsors, be sure you do a lot of research, do a lot of market research to ensure that the people you're reaching out to are dedicated to the cause or topic you are presenting, would be interested in it. I mean, throwing out proposals just into the dark hole won't be effective, or as effective as really crafting a targeted proposal to a sponsor who you feel like would be a great partner on the event. And also make sure that if you do have other people in your organization that might be reaching out, you're not overlapping. This is a really key place to involve other teams. Make sure you're not double asking. Make sure everything is seamless and streamlined and the funders aren't therefore confused. When it comes to sponsorships, the earlier you can secure them, the better. Obviously, it puts you in a good place to then know where you are at budget-wise and know what you're able to do with your event. Make sure that you set your expectations very clearly, specifically with sponsors, so that they know how many people are going to be there, how many touch points they're going to have with potential clients or members or whatever it might be, what they can or can't do as part of that sponsorship package. Will they get 5 minutes on the mic? Are they just going to get their logo on the website? All of the above, nothing. There are many things you can do with sponsors, so you can get really creative, but be sure to be specific and clear as to what they are or are not getting as part of their sponsorship. Obviously, everything else in the budget applies here, your revenue, what you're going to charge for registration, what kind of your projected cost per person is. That includes catering, that includes AV. Again, if you're working with a partner, this is a great place to pull them in, especially if they're a local partner, because they'll have a good idea of kind of the local expenses and what it costs to get catering or AV in their area, because sometimes it is very different based on where you are. So that is obviously a very important part of your planning process. If you are going to involve the local community or a partner, again, the earlier the better, but be sure that you are clearly define how you want them to be involved, both internally and then communicated to them. Those lines should be very clear, otherwise it's super easy for them to get blurred, for roles and responsibilities to get mixed up, for things to get dropped, and for expectations to not be met on either side, which causes problems. So if you want them to be super involved in the agenda and create sessions, that's great, let them know. If you don't want that, if you want to create the agenda and you want them more as like a silent partner who's offering the venue and there for support, that's also very important to know and understand and make sure they understand. So no one is put off by that. The local community, it really depends on the size of your event. I mean, like I said, I'm targeting kind of a small to mid-level event. If you're doing a very small, 50-person luncheon, that might not require anything. But then you look at our annual meeting, and we have a whole local host committee with upwards of 15, actually probably more like 25, 30 members that are essentially an extension of AEM on site or on the ground in the city we are going to. They help do events, they help with the budget, they help craft just so many different things, and that's its own beast. So it really can fall anywhere in between that, and it depends on the scope of your event and what you're trying to get out of it. All right. Any questions on event goals?
Yes. This looks marvelous, and yet we tend to butt up against expectations of what we did last year or the year before that. And it is very easy for these annual events to get rolled up, and there may be components that nobody even remembers why you do it anymore. It's just that you've always done it. So if you're going to approach it really like this, where you're thinking about the learning objectives and the outcomes, how early do you need to start that? And before you answer, let me tell the participants that there is a handout with this. If you go down on your panel on the right, There is a handout which is the whole time frame, the whole timeline for conference and event planning. So, but I'm still going to ask you that question. How early do you start with it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. We, as you'll see in the timeline, like to say a year out for that kind of 100-person event. Our annual meeting really is 18 months, but that's obviously a much larger size event. A year out is a safe place to start. It seems really far, but a year goes by so quickly, it's just crazy. We also, that timeline, I like to kind of pad it a little bit, because the earlier you can start thinking about things, the better placed you are to have a successful event. But there is some wiggle room in there because things happen and you're not necessarily able to do it a year out. So a year out is ideal. It's not necessary, but the earlier the better, especially if you are trying to make changes. And if you are, I totally understand the concept of, you know, events are just done annually and it's the same thing over and over again. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. That's certainly something that, you know, we've faced even at AAM. And I think that comes back to those metrics you set, because if you are able to start surveying and really getting into the details and analyzing what is working and what's not, because just because it's happened before or just because no one said anything doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best way to go about things. So use those metrics to kind of prove and back up your case as to why things need to change, but then do change very slowly. You know, you can't upend it all in 1 year, and it probably would be too much to take on. So if you do want to change something, make sure it's incremental, make sure it's small, see how it goes, go back on those metrics, analyze, tweak it, and then over the course of the years, you will slowly be able to use that to then create, you know, better and better events, and it won't become as difficult, and you might not have to start as early. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So once all of these are set, we move into one of the most important parts of any event, and oftentimes one of the most frustrating parts, which is registration. So the first thing that you should do, which ideally would have come while you set your budget, is defining your price and your items. And by items, it's a term that we use to mean anything other than your registration fee that attendees might be buying. So if you have extra tickets to events or workshops or lunches or whatever it might be, make sure that's clear and those are in there. So what we do at AAM, for those who have attended Museums Advocacy Day or even the annual meeting, might recognize this, but often we have a registration price and then we offer heightened registration prices for those people who are able to pay that much and want to contribute to allowing others to attend, to keeping our prices low so that it's accessible to all people. So that could be a good way to bring in some extra revenue. So that's the first thing, very important. And then building your registration platform. No matter what you're using, it's going to be very important to carefully and intricately build that platform and then test it within an inch of its life. Some organizations, there are just many different ways you can do registration. You can do it yourself. You can do it with just a simple, you know, Google form, Jot form. Those are free accounts that you can use. Jot form actually, it's free up to a certain number of respondents. So if you, I think it's 1,000 respondents or 100 respondents or something like that. So just be sure on whatever platform you're using, you know the limitations, and you're not going to get stuck if you have more registrants than you are allowed. Or some people will opt to source that out to get a vendor to do their registration for them. That's obviously more costly, more applicable to larger events where it's a little bit more complicated. But no matter what you're doing, be sure to build it and allow enough time to really test it. My rule when it comes to testing is approach the platform as though you know nothing about computers, know nothing about the event, have never seen a registration platform before, and try to break it as much as possible. Click every button, do things that aren't allowed, go back, go forward. Just try to break it. And the more you do that, the fewer problems you will face once you launch your registration to your actual registrants. So definitely allow for enough time. I think for instance, for Museums Advocacy Day, we launched in October and we probably tested for a month and a half. So that's a very long time, and it comes to, there are a bunch of different people who are tagged to test. They test, their feedback comes back to me, I edit it, I then send it out again, we test again, and the loop continues until we're at a place where everything is functionally correct, it is good to go. And obviously, you know, you could test forever and still find things you might want to tweak, but it comes to a point where functionally it's good, it's going to work, and there are other things that you might be able to change even after you've launched, that you can press pause on to make sure that your registration goes up in a timely manner. So then once you launch, when you're building, make sure you are very clear on the information you want to be collecting. What do you need from your attendees as they register? Are you going to make name badges? Do you need their title, their organization, their city, state? What things can be optional? What things can't be optional? Maybe you need their cell phone for emergency purposes, dietary information, accessibility needs. In Museums Advocacy Day, we have just a whole list of things we have to collect for the congressional visit. So we get addresses, we get where people want to visit. There's just a ton of information we're collecting. So make sure that you are bringing in the information you need to have a successful event and to make it easier for you and your team to do everything they need to do. Once you launch registration, I would suggest having a go, no-go date. If you are, maybe if it's a new event, you're not sure what it's going to look like, sometimes it's a good idea to have a date at which point you decide whether or not you are going to continue on with the event. So choose a date and choose a minimum number of registrants that you will need by that date to continue on, because sometimes if you're not getting the traction you need, it's not worth the expenses and the cost to put on that event. The other really important thing to think about when setting up registration is your reporting. I like to preemptively think about it because it makes it much easier once you launch. What information you're going to need to report out on, who needs to get that information, and how are you going to do it? What types of reports are you going to pull? How is that going to work? It has a lot to do with the platform, so make sure you're familiar with the platform you're using and the reporting process that it has in-house. And how you want to go about that. Do you want monthly, weekly, bi-weekly? Do you want just generic registration reports with everyone's name and email? Do you need specific pieces of information, i.e. dietary needs sheet that's separate from your general sheet? I find it much easier to set that stuff up ahead of time so that you're not scrambling for it when all of a sudden you need all of it, and you can already have it good to go and creating forms for you on a regular basis. The other thing is your cancellation and refund policies. This is critical. Make sure to set those very clearly and early, and ensure that your whole team, especially those people who might be interacting with your registrants and attendees, are very familiar with it. It is a surefire way to start losing money if you are relaxed or unclear on your cancellation and refund policies. At what point, if an attendee cancels, at what point will they not be refunded, or do they get a percentage back? Those are very critical. And finally, your closing date. So when are you going to close registration? Typically, we close it a month out from the day of for these smaller events. And then it also might be a good time at that point to craft your closing language, what you're going to post on your website, what you're going to send out, what you're going to put on social media, whatever it might be. Just so you have that language, you don't have to worry about it when the time comes, because trust me, things come up and you won't be thinking about it, and then all of a sudden it'll be the day of and you realize you don't have copy for that and you need to make it. So much easier to do it when it's a little bit calmer and you have the time. Any questions on this registration?
Yes, one of our participants asked what registration platform AAM uses.
Yeah. So it actually depends on the event. So so we have an outside vendor that does registration for our annual meeting. It's called CDS, and they are a full suite registration vendor. So they handle all of our annual meeting registration. They build it, they help with testing, they triage any issues. With such a large event with so many attendees, it's really helpful to have that outside vendor. As part of that, they actually have they call it an express reg system. And that's what we use for our museum's advocacy day. So it's their kind of toned down version. It's not so hands-on. I actually build it myself. It's just through their platform. So I build it, I test it, I troubleshoot any problems, and they're there to support as needed, but it's a self-serve type of system. So we use that for Museum's Advocacy Day. This year we actually have two-part systems. So CDS vendor is recording all of our basic registration information, like badge information, basic name, email, contact, all that stuff. And then we have a JOT form that's collecting all of our congressional visit information, all of those super intricate details I mentioned before. But I know we've used JOT form in the past. It's worked really well for us. Google Sheet is another one that you can use. It all depends on how complicated your registration is going to be. I personally love JOT form. I think it's great. It's really intuitive, and it allows for you to do a lot with logic, which I love, because that's when, as attendees click through, if they select certain things, they then see other things, and that's can be very helpful depending on your registration.
Thank you. One other question before we leave this section.
Yeah.
One of our participants would like to see some examples of cancellation refund policies. Is that by any chance in the handout, or is that something we can maybe send to her later?
It is not in the handout, but I would be happy to send it to you to send out for sure. Okay. You can also see it. A great example, which is probably what we use for most everything, just with tweaked language, is if you actually go to our annual meeting website, our 2020 annual meeting website, our cancellation policies are on the register page. Right. And that is what I'll just end up sending to send out. And so you can go ahead and take a look. We also have on there our kind of photo release information, and that could be super helpful for you if you're going to have a photographer on site, to make sure that it basically says, you know, by registering for this event, you are agreeing that we can take your picture and you release your right to those pictures and the basic language. But that's on our register page on the annual meeting site. But I will definitely send it to be sent out.
Okay, thank you. We'll let you move on now.
Great. These are great questions. All right, moving on to speakers and content, the ever important and sometimes very frustrating. But this is another area where partnering with an organization can be very helpful, especially, as I said before, if you're partnering with someone who is an expert, or that organization has a huge program in that topic, they might be a great place to go for speaker and content creation. So based on the outputs and outcomes, learning objectives that you defined earlier, what kind of agenda do you want to create? What types of sessions, what formats do you want that are best going to meet these goals? Are you going to have a keynote? Are you going to try and bring in an expert? Are you going to have breakouts where people can maybe be in small groups and discuss more workshop style, some of the things they learned about earlier? Is it just going to be all panel sessions? Are you going to have just single presenters? How is that go? How is the format you're choosing going to help you achieve your goals? Is very important, and that will make your event even more successful. Some people just say, okay, I'm going to have an event, I'm going to throw everyone in the room, and it's going to be in theater style, and we're going to have a speaker, and that's just going to be it. Yes, that event will happen, and it will be fine, and people will walk away with knowledge, but are you really reaching those goals that you want? And are you crafting this event to be very beneficial and worth your attendees' time? And that can be a huge part of it. Also, please, 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 when crafting your agenda, do not forget networking breaks. Everyone forgets networking breaks. It's the first thing to go because agendas get full and you want to pack all this really great information in there, but people will not sit for more than, you know, an hour and a half and just listen. They need time to get up, they need time to talk, they need time to stretch their legs. And if you don't put in networking breaks, your attendees are going to make their own networking breaks, and then it's just people up and down, leaving the room, getting up, and you don't want that. So please remember networking breaks for everyone's benefit. So once you've determined who you want to speak, worked with your partners or internally figured out who you want there, make sure that you do have some form of agreement or contract. It doesn't have to be, you know, the most official thing, but you really want to be sure that everyone's expectations are set appropriately. These agreements should lay out the length of the presentation, the general agenda, what it's going to look like, who you want to be there, what you're trying to get out of this, what you want them to talk about, and if you're going to pay them and how you're going to pay them. Very important. To make sure that everyone is on the same page and there's no misunderstandings. So you will need certain information from your speakers, and it's so much more easier to gather that all at once when you first reach out to them than it is to kind of keep going back to them saying, oh, I need this and I need this and I need this. From all of my time working with speakers, I can tell you that they are not super responsive 90% of the time. So if you can get them in one fell swoop and just get what you need from them and be done with it, it's so much easier. So make sure you know what you need from them as you reach out to them. So this could be headshot, bio, their social media handles, if that's something you're going to be doing. Be super clear as to when you're going to need their presentation back to you ahead of time. Which information you'll get from your venue, and kind of depends on how the AV is formatted, which we'll get to later. And also, you know, telling them, oh, I need your presentation to review it. We need all of these things. Just be sure that that's clear before you send it out. You're also going to need to provide them with information. So again, like in the agreement, the agenda, the length of the presentation, who's going to be there. This is really important, and this is a great thing to pull from your registration. Is it primarily CEOs? Is it mid-level employees? Is it prospective people who want to join the field? Is it students, emerging professionals? Very important for them to know. And also, if you have any presentation standards at AAM, we require that all of our presenters meet ADA standards on their presentations, and we have a whole list of guidelines that we present to them and make sure that they meet. So that could be something that you are interested in doing, and you should tell them that ahead of time. The tech specs, if it's a 16:9 PowerPoint, or they can't use PowerPoint, it has to be Keynote, whatever it is, depending on your venue, your AV, that's important information to get to them. Sometimes it's a great idea to give them a marketing toolkit. Your speakers are great people to market the event for you. They have their own networks, and theoretically their networks are people who are just as interested in that topic as they are. So they are great resources to send it out and promote it and get people interested. So if you send them a toolkit with sample tweets, sample posts, brief marketing descriptions, all the things that you might want them, and then it's super easy for them to cut and paste and send those right out, is a great idea. As I mentioned before, decide on your stipend / travel reimbursement procedures ahead of time, and then have that in the agreement so that everyone knows. Decide how much you're willing to offer someone, decide how it's going to be distributed between the keynote versus panel presenters versus single presenters. Sometimes it's prorated differently. But you want to be sure you have that ahead of time so no one is confused. The other side of this is that, if you have a 100-person conference and, it's 1 or 2 days and you have a set number of speakers and that's it. That's maybe a little bit more simple. Once you get into more of a conference style, like the annual meeting where you have multiple sessions, you might get into the submission and the proposal process, which is its own kind of situation. In that case, typically you'll need a team of reviewers, you'll have a process, you'll then meet as that team to review and grade the proposals in whatever way you decide to do so based on whatever criteria, and then you have an acceptance/rejection process. So that becomes its own whole situation. That's a little different than what I'm explaining here, but if you have any questions, happy to try and answer. That is, we have with an entire employee whose only job is to deal with submissions and proposals. All right, any questions on speakers and content?
Yes, we have one. And keep in mind, the conferences we plan are not as large as AAM. And this question is, how many attendees to start having more than one session? And how many sessions should you try for in the basic gathering? I think there are some events that really only have one speaker, and we have a lot of people in one room for one speaker. When do you begin to break it into sessions?
Clarifying question. By sessions, do you mean concurrent sessions, like happening at the same time?
I think that's what she means.
Okay. So again, it really depends on your event goals. I mean, it's hard to say because it all depends on what you're trying to get your attendees to get out of it. You could have an event that is an all-day event, and all it is 200 people in a room hearing different sessions or hearing different panels and keynotes over the course of the day. That's an entirely acceptable event. Museums Advocacy Day, we typically get between 3 and 350, and we have our full day of programming. We have many general sessions, and we have 2 breakout sessions over the course of the day. So I would say if you start getting in the 200, 300 range, it's a good idea because it kind of breaks it up. It allows for more intimate workshopping. It can be some individualization if people want to explore certain topics. But, we've had 2-day little summits that pull together 50 people. And while a day and a half is all in one room, we'll have one afternoon where they get the opportunity to do breakouts. Now, really in the past, those breakouts have been more, not as much educational and more, we did a tour of the museum and maybe another one did some kind of activity. So it was a little bit more of a networking activity than it was an educational session. But you really can do it across any number. I would say if you start getting into hundreds, then I would suggest breaking it out so that people have the opportunity, because there are just so many different learning styles, have the opportunity to experience the information you're presenting in different ways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And boy, I sure do hate to point this out, but it's getting later than it looks. So
I know. All right, we are going to run through this. All right, communications and marketing. Very key to making sure your event is an success. So as you're going through it, think about who your audience is. What are the profiles? Is it a student, a millennial, a CEO? And what does that mean for them? What are their needs, their priorities, their interests? And how are you going to contact them? So then you can segment your marketing campaigns and have targeted messaging to those different profiles, which can be an extremely effective way of getting the information in the right way to the right people. How are you going to communicate with them? Social media, emails, newsletter, paid ads. That all depends on the profiles you have, because if it's a student or millennial, they might be on social media all day, and that's the best way to get to them. If it's a CEO, that might not be as effective. Maybe it's an email or a Google ad. So it all depends on who you're trying to reach. And then specifically for social, be sure that you have created that hashtag for your event, and you've gotten the handles from your necessary speakers so that you can continually be putting those out. You can give those to speakers for them to do it. You can be consistent across the board so that as people, if you have that hashtag, then it kind of builds like a trend and interest, and everything is grouped under that one hashtag so people can find it more easily. So to make all of that more easy, it's best to do your marketing plan up front. Make sure it's clear and early, set out, you've got timelines, you know when you're reaching out to certain people, when your big pushes are, when your segments are, all of that. And make sure you have a call to action. That's that CTA right there. That is very important because you want your attendees to know what to do. And the shorter and sweeter you can make it, the better. People do not tend to read a lot. They scroll down really quickly or flip down with their thumb really quickly, and they look for the big yellow button that says register now. And that's your call to action. The other thing you might want to do is create that boilerplate language ahead of time as you're kind of in a more low-key event planning phase, so that you don't have to think about it as much when you're actually communicating with them. That gives you a set kind of pot to pull from of language. You could do it to the different profiles, have it there already, so you can just cut and paste and you're on your way when you need to do your emails and social media blasts. And then finally, we'll cover this later a little bit, but the follow-up is very important. It's how you continue the conversation. It's how you distribute any outputs, make sure people are staying engaged, and it's how you get feedback. So that is an equally as important part as any of the other communications. All right, any questions? I flew through that really fast. All right.
I don't see any questions for this section.
All right, so logistics. This is the nitty gritty. Your web page, pretty, you know, most events have them. It's how people are likely to find your event. So important to have a web page. This might seem obvious, but please be sure you actually include your registration link. So many people do not do that, and then your attendees don't know where to go. Basic information, your prices, your registration deadlines, maybe if you want to highlight some speakers, and your social media, that hashtag and any handles that I was mentioning before. So then once you get into your venue, really think about your room sets. How is that format going to help you meet your goals? We like to, at AM, we like to think through the attendees' experience from the moment they walk in the door to the moment they walk out. So I come into the event, who am I seeing? What am I feeling? How am I engaged? Just how is everything coming together to make that experience and to get me to do what you want me to do? So is it theater? Is it rounds? Is it classroom style? Is it reception style? Is it soft seating like couches and chairs? You can get very creative, obviously depending on budget, but you can get very creative on that. So that is a great way to help meet your goals as well. Then catering. Some of your venues will have an in-house caterer that you're required to use. Some will have a list of approved caterers. As soon as you can, start that process. Make sure that you're collecting dietary information during your registration. That helps a lot as you're crafting your menu. Our best practice is always to have a gluten-free and a vegetarian option. That kind of covers most of your bases. But also make sure you push your caterer to get creative. They're actually, I find them very fun to work with. There are so many things they can do to meet a budget and to make things go a long way, to dress up maybe some more basic food. So just get really creative, and you can have a wonderful catering experience for not so much money. AV, very similar. Make sure if they have an in-house or you're contracting externally. This is going to, you know, really maybe have some more back and forth with the venue to make sure that the AV externally, if you're working with external vendor, is appropriately aware of what the venue is like, what they need. i.e., their power outlets. How is that going to work? There are so many details there, but typically your vendor will know what to ask. And if it's a local vendor, a lot of these venues, they're used all the time, so the vendors are familiar with them. Make sure the needs of all your sessions are met. Don't just throw out a AV set and assume it's going to be fine for all. Make sure that, if it's a keynote versus a panel versus a workshop, what do you need for each of those, and make sure to be specific. Other super important is your on-site supplies. Some people don't think of this until way too late because it's on-site, and you don't think about that until you're on-site. But if you have things, make sure you make that list early and then order them, or have them designed or shipped there, whatever it might be. These are handouts, folders. Is your sponsor bringing any materials, and how are they sending it? Basic, if you're doing crafty things, you want stickies or pens or whatever it might be. Table tents for names. The other huge thing is, how are you doing name badges? Are you doing, the lick'em stick'ems that people just write their own name on? Are you going to print them in-house and just bring them with you? Are you going to have a vendor do them? There are many different ways you can do that. And so figuring that out, obviously budget allowing, is important. The run of show is a very critical part of this to make sure it goes smoothly. Even in the most basic event, it can be the most helpful thing, because it is a minute by minute breakdown of how this is going to go, where everyone's going to be, and what they're doing. It can get as specific as you want, and the more specific, the better. I mean, we write down so-and-so arrives, so-and-so leaves, so-and-so goes to X room to make sure that, this person is there. We get very specific, and it means that you can send that out to your partners, you can send it out to the venue, you can send it out to a random person on the street, and that person will know if they were to go to the event and have to run it. They will know exactly what is happening and when catering's supposed to be out, when catering, when the meal actually starts, what's supposed to be there, who's managing that, what their contact information is, all of the specifics, and it can be very, very helpful. If you're going to need extra staff or volunteers, determine that ahead of time. Make sure you have lots of time to get them to volunteer, or as we do at AAM, to volunteer them to do it with our staff internally. And make sure that their roles are clearly communicated to them. They know what they need. If you have to do a training, a webinar, an on-site training, whatever it might be, depending on, if you have 200 volunteers from the local community, or you're just doing an internal, your staff are volunteering to help you out, that makes it a little different. And that can be put in your run of show, so everyone is aware of what's happening and when. The last thing to do is to send out the know before you go. This is a critical email you send to your registrants. It's how you give them all the information they need when they arrive, how to get there, maybe directions to actually get from the parking lot to the door itself, parking information, obviously the address, the timing of things, any pre-handouts or work if you want them to read something before they get there, that's important, and the contact information they need, the venue, maybe the on-site person's contact, whoever you want to give them. It's important to include that so that all of their needs or questions are answered. Any questions on that?
Well, no one has posted any questions, and that might be just as well, because we're almost out of time.
I know. All right. I've got 2 more slides.
Okay, go fast.
I'm going to go real fast. On-site. So you're there. If you've done everything as this list outlines, then on-site is an easy time. It's a fun time. Some conferences are large enough that they need a pre-con meeting, so that will involve the vendors and the venue and you and your partners and everyone else to potentially walk through the run of show, make sure everything is set. Sometimes you just do a walkthrough where you schedule a time. If you don't have a pre-con meeting, I would still suggest a walkthrough, whether morning of or day before, whenever you get into town, walk through the space with the venue, make sure that things are set appropriately. You can kind of go, okay, catering's happening at 12. Yep, we're all good. Okay, great. You see the AV is set up. You might be able to test the AV. It's just a good way to make sure that when you walk in the next day or the event starts, you're not surprised by anything. If you're having a day of social media person, just make sure that whoever's managing them is aware of the situation. That person knows your hashtag, knows your handles, knows kind of the tone of your event and what they should be doing, and how they should be promoting it. Make sure your volunteers are prepped ahead of time and have a check-in when they arrive. So assign them someone to check them in, to make sure they know where they're going, to run through their responsibilities again, make sure everything goes smoothly. You'll need someone to run check-in. That can be very simple, as someone walking up to a desk and you hand them a name badge, or maybe they have to scan something and then their name badge prints. It gets a little bit more complicated the larger you are. Someone will usually need to manage the speakers. It's better for them to get there early, test their AV, make sure they need anything, troubleshoot any problems. If you have sponsors or exhibitors, I would highly recommend assigning someone to manage them as well. Make sure they're kind of, sometimes you need to treat them like VIPs, and they have someone there. It's really nice when they have someone there to greet them, make sure they have what they need. They can see how their sponsorship is being displayed, everything like that. Other than that, once you've done all of this pre-planning, your job on site is to just make sure timing goes as planned and troubleshooting any problems, which with all of this planning that you've done, you shouldn't have any. So it can be a very not stressful time or a pretty stressful time, depending. You never really know with events. And finally, post-conference. Very important to schedule a debrief. You likely want to one internally with your team and externally with your partners or stakeholders. Make sure to write down any notes, things that worked, things that didn't work, because that will influence future meetings. The survey is a great tool to get feedback, and this can be part of that follow-up email we were talking about before, or separate, depending on if you just want one call to action in your survey email. Get specific with the metrics that you had set out earlier, and you can break it up into, if you want to target certain attendees, you maybe first timers or your speakers or your exhibitors or anything like that, and you can ask tailored questions. Just make sure when you're accepting all this feedback, not all feedback is helpful, and there's always going to be people who have a problem with something. So take that with a grain of salt, and then take the pieces that are actually truly helpful and informative and use those to better your meeting. And the more data you can collect, the better positioned you are to market it better, to create these awesome experiences for your attendees. You can also use a post-conference follow-up to distribute any papers or outputs or blog posts, or promote future events, which is a great way to do that because you have all this audience in one group. And then it's time to reconcile your goals and your metrics with the data you collected, both your survey data and your budget, to make sure that your event met or did not meet the goals that you set out. And that is all the information I have. Oh, actually, my last slide is a sneak peek, or it's just a snippet of the handout that is attached. So this is our timeline. In the handout itself, this column on the left that says event date, if you put the event date at the top, the column will automatically set the dates based on this timeline. So that's an easy way for you to just see where about you should be landing in terms of these items. And then we always add an owner on the right side so that everyone knows what who needs to be doing what. But that is all the information I have. I know we're almost exactly at time, but if there are any questions, I would be very happy to answer them.
Oh, I see one. Hang on. Oh, it's a comment, actually. This has been so helpful. Thank you. Yes,
I'm so glad.
Thank you to Clara for her expertise. Thank you to AAM for sharing her with us. I need to throw in a thank you to the Texas Association of Museums, which allows us to use the webinar platform. I appreciate that. And to everyone who participated, have a look at the handout, and if you want to ask a follow-up question, her email is very easy. It is callen, as in Clara Allen, at aam-us.org.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, if you want certain resources, I have some templates that we use. If there's something here I didn't mention, or you want like the language for something, please reach out. I would be happy to help.
Now, I know that before you sign off, there are some of you who are sitting out there saying, geez, I wish so-and-so had heard this, and maybe a board member, a volunteer, another staff member. And this is just a reminder that the COSMA webinars are recorded and will be available on our website. Give us till the end of the week. It doesn't happen automatically, but anyone who is a COSMA member can get in and access that and enjoy what we enjoyed today. The next time we see you will be on January the 14th for our COSMA conversation. We do programming every single month for our state museum associations. And in January, we're going to be talking about a really important topic, isolation. How do we work in isolation? Some of us feel it geographically, others of us feel it because we're a one-man shop. And how do we deal with that in a creative and healthy way? So with that said, I guess we will sign off. Clara, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Everybody have happy holidays.